We're so excited to have each of you here. Over the next month, we have about 200 students and faculty from 18 universities across 13 economies participating in this simulation. There's the numbers of you. Thank you so much, Tina. 16 expert speakers and 30 faculty facilitators who will help over the next 2 weeks. Tina, if you could go to the next slide as well. Here's our universities and partners as part of this project. Again, they're in your simulation booklet, and they're on Canvas. Next slide, please, Tina. Our schedule for today includes introductions and welcome. And then we have 2 plenary speakers, and then 2 talks with information specifically about the simulation and how you as students can get the most out of it. We will then divide you into your delegation meeting rooms. That's the green, orange, and blue rooms that you can find on Canvas, which room you're in. And you will have an opportunity to meet and talk with your fellow delegates and make plans for deciding on your pledges for the first workshop session. More information to come about how you will make those determinations as your individual countries. And now I'll turn the floor over to my colleague, Dr. Melissa Withers.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone to our APRU Student Global Climate Change Simulation. Really happy to have you all here. And we have a packed schedule for today, so let's just jump right in. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Christopher Tremuen, who was elected as APRU's 4th Secretary General and took up the role from June of 2011. Before heading the APRU International Secretariat, he was the Vice President and Pro-Vice Chancellor International of the University of Auckland in New Zealand. He holds bachelor's and master's degrees in social anthropology from the University of Auckland, a master's degree in public administration from Harvard University, and a PhD in political science on Southeast Asian politics from the University of Canterbury. So let us hear his welcome address.
It is now beyond all doubt that our lives are at stake and that the future of our ecosystem is under imminent threat. Many of the thresholds for keeping average global temperature rise below 1.5 degrees have been crossed. Yet it seems that those with political power lack the will to act in proportion to this rolling calamity. We all bear the responsibility to act. And one of the ways to fulfill this responsibility is to gain the knowledge and skills to enter the arena of climate change negotiations and to spend our lives committed to the common goal of combating climate change. So I welcome and congratulate all of you for joining this APRU Global Climate Change Simulation. It is also a pleasure to welcome distinguished guests, expert speakers, President Michael Schill of the University of Oregon, and our partners, UN Habitat, the IMF, Adidas, Rebalance Earth, and CLP Hong Kong. Thank you all for your support for this program and for sharing your insights. APRU is an association of 60 leading research universities in 19 countries and territories around the Pacific, East Asia, Southeast Asia, Australia and New Zealand, North and South America. And we were established in 1997 by the presidents of 4 Californian universities, Berkeley, Caltech, UCLA and USC. And our international secretariat is in Hong Kong. Compared to our foundation 25 years ago, international relations are now much more complex. The geopolitics of higher education have shifted, And the COVID-19 pandemic has given us an unwelcome understanding of a truly global crisis and how quickly everything can change. Yet, as we all know, the challenges of climate change are of a far greater order of magnitude. They require international cooperation at an even higher level and much bigger scale. We all watched COP26, hoping for so much more, and that day must come if human society is to survive. Within your university communities, I urge you to help shape priorities, academic courses, and international collaborations that build on the fact that climate change cannot be solved without collaboration across disciplines and across international borders. That we cannot solve climate change without working together on solving inequality, racism, deficits in political participation, and other forms of social injustice. So seek the knowledge and skills that will advance the green economy and preserve or repair the ecosystem, mitigate the extreme effects of climate change, and maintain public health. Gain the knowledge of international relations and the legal training to take on the carbon industry, even as some propose, to advance an international law against ecocide. In short, we all need your commitment to generate the political will to meet the challenges ahead. APRU plays its part as a neutral international platform, amplifying cooperation across the Pacific. We have many climate-related initiatives, and we look forward to working with all of you. In concluding, I thank the strong team at the University of Oregon, Professor Dennis Galvan and Ellie van der Grift, along with the APRU Sustainable Cities and Landscapes program for supporting this simulation again. I also thank the APRU Global Health Program and its director, Dr. Melissa Withers from the University of Southern California, who initiated the development of the APRU climate change simulation last year and is the key lead of this invaluable collaboration. I wish you all well in this simulation. Thank you.
Next, it is my pleasure to introduce Michael Schill, who is the 18th president of the University of Oregon. He holds a tenure faculty appointment in the UO School of Law. As president, he has launched a series of initiatives to advance the university's priorities of enhancing academic and research excellence, supporting student access and success, and improving campus experience and diversity. Prior to coming to the U of O, Schill was the Dean of the University of Chicago Law School and Dean of the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law. And he was a law professor at both New York University and the University of Pennsylvania. Schill graduated from Princeton with a degree in public policy and earned his JD from the Yale Law School. Please join me in welcoming Michael Schill.
There we got it. Thank you, Ellie, and it is a pleasure for me to be here today to address you all. The University of Oregon is excited to be a co-organizer with the University of Southern California and the APRU Secretariat for the second APRU climate change simulation. Environmental protection and sustainability, they are critical issues that our world and all of us must address. I'm excited that we have 170 students from 18 APRU universities coming together to focus on this important topic. Now in Oregon, we have experienced a record-setting heat dome, devastating wildfires that covered our cities in smoke and ash, and record amounts of rain in our cooler months. Many other parts of the United States and the world have experienced similar, even more dramatic changes in their climate. It is imperative that we respond to these changes and work to implement practices to conserve, to preserve, and to sustain our environment. The partnership between University of Oregon's Sustainable Cities and Landscape Research Hub, APRU Global Health Program hosted by USC, and APRU is one of the many ways that we can all work together to create a more sustainable and more equitable world. Now, I'm proud that this is an area of strength for the University of Oregon. Many of our academic programs have received national recognition for their focus on sustainability, including our environmental law program, our Green MBA, and degrees in our School of Architecture and Environment. We're excited to have 11 students from these programs participate in this simulation today. Now, this focus on taking care of our world is shared across our campus and across disciplines. We have over 140 researchers with the environment and sustainability as their central focus of scholarship. 2 of them are among the 30 faculty members participating in today's climate simulation. The same is true across the APRU network, with each of your universities playing a key role in future climate solutions. Now, as our next leaders and researchers, I hope this simulation sets the foundation for you to connect with peers across the Pacific Rim and to better understand the challenges of climate change. I also know it can be easy to feel despair and to feel powerlessness in the face of extreme weather, climate change, and its impact on our lives and future generations. But no, there is reason to hope. The students and faculty who participated in this climate change simulation in 2021, they had similar feelings at the start, but they reported being more hopeful at the end of the simulation. Through the activities, negotiations, and discussions, they found hope for global cooperation, hope for creative and innovative solutions, and hope for bringing together people from all across the world to create a more sustainable tomorrow. Now, at the end of this simulation, I hope you walk away with a similar attitude and outlook. These are difficult and challenging problems for our world, but together, I believe we can find solutions and build a sustainable future for our world and all of us. Again, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for the organizers, and I hope you enjoy the program today.
Thank you so much, President Schill. Wonderful to have you joining us. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our next kickoff speaker, Bernhard Barth. Bernhard is a Human Settlements Officer at UN Habitat's Regional Office for Asia and the Pacific, located in Fukuoka, Japan, where he oversees the country's programs in the Philippines, Laos PDR, and in 6 Pacific Island countries. He also oversees UN Habitat Cities and Climate Change Initiative across the Asia and Pacific region, and is the focal point for urban planning and design, gender and capacity development. Prior to joining the regional office, he worked for 6 years in UN Habitat's headquarters in Nairobi, Kenya. He also worked for UN ESCAP and for various NGOs in the UK, Papua New Guinea, Madagascar, and Germany on a broad range of governance, rights, and development issues. He holds master's degrees in economics and in environmental policy. And thank you again for being here to speak to us today.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and great honor to be here with you again. UN Habitat, of course, is very pleased to be associated with this course on climate change simulation, clearly a priority for UN Habitat as well. Certainly from an urban planning perspective, simulations, scenario plannings are critical. And so linking up with you through that is, of course, very important. Next slide. Let me just say a few words on UN Habitat's priorities at the moment. Of course, everything is framed in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and more recently in the context of broader conflict and urban crisis. But our current pillars of priority are housing for all cities as drivers of change, with a particular emphasis on climate change and localizing the SDGs. I will focus on our climate change work, but of course, bring it then back to your activities in terms of the simulation planning. We're looking at resilience building with communities, aligning urban basic services with climate change planning, looking at innovation, but also do that very much in the context of multi-level governance and the impacts that national policies have on the local level, but also the contributions of the local level to inform national policy. Next slide. So very briefly, some of those very critical dimensions from our perspective, of course, adaptation is critical as it affects developing countries and the urban poor. There are 1 billion people living in informal settlements. These are, to a very large extent, the communities that we care about. In particular, we have a number of initiatives that focus particularly on those. Out of the 1 billion people in informal settlements, we assume that between 600,000 and 700,000 are amongst the most vulnerable to climate change, given the precarious locations that they live in and given the lack of adaptive capacity that they face. Next slide. I mentioned before that the urban dimension is critical, and maybe in your deliberations you will feel that it's not directly important for your simulations, but the reality is that whilst 84% of the NDCs now contain urban content, the city commitments very often are much stronger. So national policy is to some extent lagging behind and needs to be informed by local action, by local needs, starting, of course, with the simulations and the dialogue that comes from that. Next slide. Yes, good planning, of course, needs to go hand in hand with finance, otherwise there will be no implementation. So again, from a simulation perspective, it is critical to move towards good projects, to integrate the finance dimension straight away. Now, the gap in particular for adaptation is very, very high, and to bridge that gap requires huge efforts. You can see from the numbers there that A, very little adaptation finance goes to cities, and B, that we need trillions, but we have only billions at the moment for adaptation finance. Next slide. So it's critical, of course, from a climate change perspective to not get trapped in yet another silo. Climate action needs to be integrated into broader urban sustainability planning. I've mentioned before the housing and the SDG localization dimensions as priorities. It is critical to connect those dots. It's also, of course, important to ensure that when we talk about low emission development, that we look at this from the development opportunities, but also, of course, the challenges in terms of who would be most affected by the policies. And this is particularly important because as global greenhouse gas emissions continue to grow, the urban share is also increasing, and the latest IPCC report has indicated that we're now assuming 70% of the urban share of greenhouse gas emissions, up from 62% in 2015. Next slide. Innovation and technology are critical, maybe again, not your immediate entry point, but I think as you look through the scenarios towards implementation, these issues are absolutely critical. And if you look at the frameworks and tools that we are promoting, they, of course, also directly contribute to climate change simulations, putting people at the center of solutions, look at integrated systems approach, and visioning for the future. Obviously, very similar to the work that you do, and of course the participation, partnerships, finance, capacity building, and research as the tools supporting this. Next slide. So just to wrap up, there are a few things that I would like you to consider as you go into your simulation exercises. I think they are relevant for all of you with an urban or not urban context, integrating greenhouse gas emission reduction opportunities, but also see how you address climate change. Are the priorities adaptation or mitigation, or both? Can you create synergies between both? And then, of course, again, the partnerships and participation and the multi-level governance dimension. How can you ensure that you get national support for local action? Important to integrate. I think the dimension of the spatial dimension of climate change is critical, and finance I have talked about, so I just wanted to keep that up again. And that brings me to the end of the presentation, and I wish you good luck. It's been last year very exciting to see what the outcomes were of your simulations, and hope that this cohort will have as much fun and as much success as last year. So all the best to all of you.
Thank you so much. Lots for our students to think about. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce Ebru Gentolu, who is the Senior Director of Sustainable Sourcing for Adidas, or Adidas. Which way should I say it? She leads the environmental program, which is an essential part of the Adidas sustainability strategy and covers decarbonization, waste, water, chemical and wastewater management in the supply chain. She manages a team of over 30 sustainability experts located in 7 countries. Ebru has more than 25 years of international experience in the apparel industry, specializing in materials and sourcing, and over 12 years of experience leading global sustainability initiatives. She has successfully developed and executed strategies for sustainable materials adoption in complex supply chains, including for product traceability. She holds a bachelor's degree in textile engineering and a master's degree in contemporary management, and she is currently based in Taiwan. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, thank you. Hello and good morning and good evening to all participants. It's a great pleasure to see so many young people gathered in one virtual place and learn and advocate for sustainability. I can already feel the passion and I'm inspired by it actually. It's a great honor for me to present Adidas today in this call and share with you how we are working on climate change. I hope you leave our session today feeling informed about what Adidas is doing for sustainability, confident that we are taking steps to address climate change on multiple fronts, and also inspired to make your voice heard and make a positive impact. After a quick introduction of myself, I will cover 3 topics. First topic is going to be our commitment to sustainability and our targets. Second, how we design our products to lower our carbon footprints. And the third is going to be how we collaborate with our supplier chain, who represent nearly 90% of our carbon footprint, to lower down GHG emissions. Next slide, please. As mentioned, I'm a textile engineer and have been working for Adidas over 20 years. I worked in EMEA region, Indian subcontinent, spent last 10 years in APAC region and located in Taiwan. I've been always passionate about sustainability and volunteering on many projects in the past years. And that actually gave me the opportunity now to head up the new department, Sustainable Sourcing, established in October. It's covering all divisions. So we take care of footwear, apparel, and A&G, accessories and gears. And we manage the entire supplier base. We are talking about hundreds and thousands of suppliers. Like many other companies, Adidas is also heavily investing in people to achieve its ambitious sustainability targets. The team right now is 35 people, and we are aiming to grow it up to 50. As you can see, sustainability, climate is definitely not it's a team effort, and it requires a lot of people to work together across divisions and locations. And just a side note, I'm a mother of twin sons. We graduated high school only last year, so I'm really waiting for the university application results to see them like you guys learning and thriving for the better of our environment and future. Next slide, please. Today I'm here representing Adidas, as I mentioned, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with the brand of 3 stripes. So I'm not going to dwell too much here, but I want to share a few things you may want to be familiar with. So in 2021, we had 62,000 employees, 2,500 own retail stores, and across 400 locations, a true global presence. And what does it mean? For a sense of product scope, in 2021, we produced 304 million pairs of shoes and 482 million apparel pieces, altogether over 800 million pieces all around the world. So this has a big impact, right? We are talking about big numbers here. Next slide, please. Our commitment to sustainability is rooted from our purpose. We believe through sport we have the power to change lives. Clearly, as also previous speakers mentioned, with COVID's impact, there is a significant focus on sustainability. Sustainability matters, especially for the younger generations, I mean you, right? And 70% of our consumers consider sustainability in their buying decisions. It's not a secret that fashion industry is responsible around 10% of the carbon emissions. So 85% of Generation Z believe their choices determine their future. So they want real outputs and real results. And they want to understand what the brands are doing when it comes to climate change, waste, water, chemical use, and human rights. They want transparency. We are committed to our decarbonization targets, ultimately reach climate neutrality by 2050. Next slide, please. To underline our commitment to sustainability and decarbonization, in 2021, we defined sustainability as one of the strategic focus areas. We need to create our strategy and roadmap to get to our goal in a way that allows us to drive a positive impact. So in 2025, 9 out of 10 of our products will be sustainable. So 2025, we will achieve climate neutrality in our own operations. All this big scope that I mentioned about our offices, distribution centers, retail shops, and transportation. And we will reduce 15% of GHG emissions per product by 2025, continuing our journey to climate neutrality by 2050. These targets will keep us accountable to our consumers and to the global planet. If we can move to the next slide. Now I want to make it a little bit tangible for you. I want to talk about how we are working on our products creation with these targets in mind. A good example will be the collaboration of Allbirds and Adidas. So we created a shoe, and this shoe is 63% less emissions compared to a similar product. And we have to look at it in a holistic way. So we start by training our employees to be a part of the process, as well as sustainability ambassadors, not just in our company, but in the society they live in. Through our product, we reach to our consumers, make them understand what is sustainability, what is climate change, what we do, and we inspire them. We collaborate with other industry players to share knowledge, and we innovate together. Through minimalist and multifunctional designs, we focus on reducing waste, use less materials, use recycled materials. We work with startup companies. We work with big major players to innovate new materials which have lower carbon footprints. And we support the scaling up of all those initiatives through our suppliers, through investments. As you can see, we have many players, processes involved in one creation of one shoe, and it's important that we work together. Achieving lower carbon footprint for a shoe would not have been possible if everyone involved didn't came to the table with a clear aligned goal to make it better for the planet and for the industry. Next slide, please. For the purpose of this session, I would like to deep dive into green manufacturing. Well, the major of carbon footprint sits in our supplier chain. So if you look on the top, you will see how a shoe would be manufactured, and during that process, what are the carbon emissions that has happened. So let's deep dive into a shoe making. Raw materials make up to 32% of the emissions in the value chain. This includes producing those raw materials. Manufacturing processing makes up to 49% of the emissions. This includes like dyeing the t-shirt or the shoe and finishing processes. And then you put them together, assembly. That makes around 10% of the emissions. So overall, from raw material to assembly, it makes 91% of global emissions of Adidas value chain. So clearly our focus should be to reduce the footprint at the supplier chain and raw material. This is an incredibly big challenge for all companies that produce products, including Adidas. There isn't one single solution that can tackle all of these challenges. As such, it is essential that we address this from multiple angles with multiple partners. How do we do that? Next slide, please. Collaboration is key. We cannot do it alone clearly. We need our suppliers to get on board and work towards the goal together with us. They are the ones who own manufacturing, the technologies. They have strong relations with technology suppliers. They work within those countries. They have relations with the governments that they operate with. There are 4 major initiatives that we are working with our supplier partners to reduce the carbon footprint. One of them is rooftop solars on site. Other one is power purchase agreements, so they convert their energy into renewable energy. We are looking into replacing coal to better fuel and manufacturing innovation opportunities, right? So when we work with them with rooftop solars, let's look into each one. Rooftop solars, we initiate consultancy services with our suppliers to conduct feasibility studies. Once the project is commercially viable, then we follow up if they sign the plans, if they contracted and start using renewable energies. The major roadblocks are the structure of the buildings, limitation of our regeneration by regulations. So talking about power purchase agreements, we lobby together with other brands, with the governments, connect with energy companies and our suppliers to identify potential collaboration opportunities, investment opportunities in those countries, and so that they can utilize solar and wind farm outputs. These are very long-term projects, so we start working on those projects like 5 years, 10 years before to get to 2050. Coal replacement is another big one. Over 50% of the energy we use in textile mills are from steam, which is generated by burning coal. Coal is the most pollutant fuel, as you might know. So we publicly committed already to phase out on-site coal usage latest by 2025. So we continue to map out existing plans with our partners. What are we doing? We are looking into alternative energy availabilities in the related geographies, cost structures, technology enhancements, return of investment. And we are not alone in this journey. As a signatory brand, Adidas is collaborating with other brands through UNFCCC working groups to identify these opportunities. Looking into manufacturing innovation, I think innovation is the key. Today, nobody has the recipe to reach to climate neutrality by 2050. We are looking into low carbon technologies which reduce the carbon footprint of fabric manufacturing, coloration and dyeing at least 50% compared to conventional technologies. These initiatives will help us to achieve the targets we set for 2025 and beyond, but they will not come without any challenges. So if you can move to the next slide. There are key challenges to overcome in the industry. The first one is lack of expertise and experience in the supplier base. So what we are doing is we are trying to increase the awareness through engagement. We are creating and rolling out trainings in the supply base together with other brands. The second challenge is energy intensive technology. So we work with the suppliers to increase their efficiencies and reduce the energy they use. Look into innovative solutions of lower carbon technologies. The third challenge is availability of green energy where they operate. So we are lobbying with governments and policymakers to change that in the long run. And we collaborate with energy companies and linking our supplier base. Next slide, please. Decarbonization requires clearly investment and innovative mindset. It's going to be a license to operate for companies in the future, for Adidas, but also for the whole industry. We expect our suppliers to see the world with possibilities and aspire to lead and not follow to get to 2050. We know that we cannot make without them, without industry collaborations, academic support, government engagements, and policymakers. We are all together in this game. Clearly, this event is a great example how we can collaborate and support each other to help address climate change and make it a positive impact. We believe together we can make it happen. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for everyone who's been putting questions in the chat. Some have been emailed directly to me and some directly to Melissa. So Bernard and APRU, we have some questions for you. The first question is for APRU. Is that what are the possible mechanisms that other industries could develop in order to achieve sustainable manufacturing processes?
When you talk about sustainable manufacturing processes, my understanding is your question is about the area like textile and footwear manufacturing, right? So the technologies is that we are looking into technologies where the outcome is the same, but it's not done in the traditional way, so that we use less energy, we use less water, we use less chemicals. A good example is coloration. So the coloration is done today in a machine where you put the fabric, and then it keeps turning with the chemicals, and then it gets colored and it gets dried. Now they are printing it, like the paper you put and then it prints, right? So that lowers down the energy usage, chemical and others. So these are the collaborations we create with other technologies, other industries. I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you. Bernard, we have a question for you, if you are available. The question from the student is, what are some policy decisions that some countries could implement to achieve the pledge of limiting temperature to 1.5 degrees Celsius?
That's, of course, a very big question. I had this one slide up, and I see there's also another question on the NDCs. We certainly are keen on strong national frameworks that are fully aligned with the Paris Agreement. Of course, from a climate change mitigation perspective, there are those key big sectors, building and construction, that contributes to 40% also of the energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. So those are particularly critical, but also not so easy to implement. There are others that are also very big contributors, like transport, where it's easier to make a huge difference and go about that very quickly. There are also, of course, sectors like waste, with the methane pledges that are coming through, where a lot of opportunities exist. And of course, you've heard all of those different entry points from the industry, as presented in the case of Adidas. However, just one point again, of course, critical is that it doesn't stay at the policy level, at the national level. It's important that it feeds through the system. It's critical to include subnational governments. It's critical to give local governments also the power and the capacities to move their own priorities forward in line with those broader frameworks.
Great, thank you. APRU, the next question is for you. And the student is wondering if all the products that Adidas makes are eco-friendly, or to what extent would you quantify that your products are eco-friendly?
I mean, eco-friendly, so to say, we call it sustainable content, right? There are multiple different aspects to call a product sustainable, but of course, the biggest portion we are looking into is to, if we are able to reduce the carbon footprint of that product, is our major focus. So we'll look into life cycle analysis of this product, and if we are lowering that down, that's how we are measuring.
Great, thank you. Bernard, just like you described the increase of urban content in NDCs, are there any trends you see barely emerging for NDCs to look out for the future?
So the analysis that we've done looks at a number of parameters. I have just really presented in that one slide the highest level dimension that really just looks at how NDCs take up the urban dimension. We have broken that down into adaptation and mitigation. We've broken that further down into various degrees. I think it's critical to note that not only has the content increased now to 84% from 69% since the first NDCs were issued, but also that the content that really looks at urban as a priority has increased from 16% to almost 50% over the 5 years from the first NDCs. We have then analyzed this in much more detail for a number of countries, and will do so again and present that at COP27, really looking at the subsectors of adaptation and mitigation, and then turn this really into policy recommendations to highlight where some of the challenges are. And just to also maybe say the NDCs are critical, they're important, they're an important advocacy and messaging tool, but of course much more detail is normally in national strategies and policies. So a comparison there is also important. We're working on that at the moment, and then you really get into the nitty-gritty of the sectoral analysis and where the policy gaps are and where improvements are most important.
Great, thank you. So many good student questions. APRU, here's a question back to you about your supply chain. And the question is, how difficult is it for Adidas to bring your suppliers onto the same page? How do you collaborate in a way where your suppliers have similar sustainability standards? And what are some of the challenges that you've experienced?
So that is a good question. That's actually the whole job of my team, to collaborate with suppliers and to make sure that they understand what we are trying to achieve, see the big picture, and work together with us towards the goal. As I mentioned, the challenges, there's not too many people in our suppliers who does understand the technicalities of all these initiatives, how to implement it, how to get it on board, how to plan and strategize it. So this is the part we support them, and actually this is where we need all of you guys to, you know, continue your journey here, develop yourselves and be part of these suppliers to make them create their strategy. So definitely the business case has to be there for a supplier to be interested, right? So we are working together with them to build the right business case. It's going to be licensed to operate in the future. I think this is something nobody should forget. If they don't do it today, they won't be able to operate in the future. That is the ultimate thing that we share with them.
But it sounds like it's an ongoing process.
It's an ongoing process. It's a change management, and a huge change management.
Great, thank you. Bernard, what are some of the key barriers, thinking more about barriers and challenges, what are some of the key barriers for obtaining more finance for climate-related issues? And the second part of this question for the student is, are there examples of successful negotiations around finance for climate?
Yeah, I mean, the barriers, of course, are, well, there are definitely many, but it's also very interesting to see what answer you get depending on who you ask. If you ask the international development banks, the big financiers, as they say, there's plenty of money, but there are no good projects. I don't quite think so. I mean, there's obviously the capacity gap there, but there are also issues of, for example, local governments or communities not being able to access international funding due to sovereignty issues. So there are all those financial barriers. Critical for us is also to overcome the barriers that have to do with, of course, financing, normally looking for some sort of return on investment. And with funding urban poor communities, where the risks are particularly high, where the returns of resilient projects are not monetized in a way, all of those issues are critical. There are many tools emerging to get to the second part in terms of bringing blended funding together, in terms of having more direct adaptation finance in place. But unfortunately, it is a long journey. There are now 30 facilities in place that support cities in the development of good projects. So this is definitely one success story where cities can reach out and get that type of support. There are also a lot of intermediary organizations that bridge that capacity gap. As UN Habitat, we work, for example, with the Adaptation Fund, which is a mechanism under the Framework Convention for Climate Change, where we, in a way, take the risks, provide the project management, but there is local implementation by cities and communities. So there is a lot of movement there, but you remember my slides, we're still trillions behind of what's needed. So it's an uphill struggle.
Great, thank you. Here's a question about the life of a shoe. So what happens at a shoe, for a shoe, an Adidas shoe, once its life is done? When a consumer throws it away, are there ways that they're recyclable or biodegradable?
Okay. Those are the things that now we are working on. So this whole concept of circularity, right? That's what we are talking about, the life cycle of the product after use. So we are working on a concept called made to be remade. So we are developing and designing the shoe in a way that we can recycle it back to raw material and back to shoes. But this is just in progress. What we are also looking into is through circularity, repurpose, reuse, recycle concepts. So there are certain products in apparel where we take back and then we repurpose them, sell as second hands, or we actually rent them. So those are all the different ways of looking into after they are used, what is going to happen to them. So this is a long journey for, I think, all textile industry. There are lots of solutions, but not a big a global solution at the moment. So we are working on that.
Okay, great. Here's a question that I'd like to address to both of you, which is how has COVID-19 impacted the journey to mitigating the effects of climate change from the perspective from each of your work? And along with that, how has it impacted businesses in implementing sustainability changes? Bernard, do you want to start?
Yes, there are. Let me try to give this a positive spin, if you like. Of course, the reality is that it's been very, very clear that COVID-19 and climate change are very much compounding impacts on vulnerable populations. There are many dimensions that vulnerable communities suffer from, for example, the access to safe water. And there are many linkages to climate change. And there are also, of course, the links to COVID-19 in terms of hygiene and so on. Crowded spaces can be particularly vulnerable to climate change, but of course also to COVID-19. Now, COVID-19, of course, has brought all of those issues to the fore. In particular, the housing crisis has been, in the last 20 years or so, hasn't been as high on the policy agenda as it is now. And to look at that from the perspective of COVID and climate change and other risks in an integrated manner is certainly an opportunity. Also, the conversation on green recovery, linking COVID funding to sustainable investments into projects that build resilience or low emission development, all of those are opportunities. But it's also very clear that in many countries, projects that address climate change were delayed because governments weren't able to work. In some places, we were not able to go to communities because of extended lockdowns. And so all of that is a huge challenge. And let me just then finish by, I had that very briefly on the slide, but I did not get to this. During the height of the global lockdowns over the 2020-2021 period, global greenhouse gas emissions reduced by just as much as they need to reduce to get us to the 1.5 degree goal. And that was with everything shutting down. And now they are up again. There's just a little blip in the trend. So it certainly has indicated how much effort is needed and provided that additional policy impetus, hopefully not despair for many, but certainly provided clearer guidance on how to move forward.
Thank you. APRU, same question to you.
Maybe I can look at it from a different perspective, from a business perspective. So what happened with COVID-19 is actually, it did wake up the whole population of the world to sustainability, right? So in the past, when you look into the consumers, how much they did care about sustainability and they would change their choices of shopping was very different than after COVID, or right now where we are. So that supports actually the businesses to be able to talk about and invest into sustainability, because there is an interest to that. That is one thing. When it comes to implementation during the COVID period, actually, as Bernard said, there had been many delays. Because it was not possible to get to those places, the factories were shut down and the borders were shut down. So we had some impact, but I think that impact is not going to be hitting us towards our 5, 10 and longer year targets. So I would say that yes, COVID made it difficult, but we feel comfortable that we will continue our journey.
Great, thank you. I have one more question for both of you. We're not going to get to all of the questions that are in the chat. They're really good questions. I will post them on the Canvas site. If you have a few extra minutes, you could stay and answer some questions in the chat too. One more question, and then we're going to do a picture and take a quick break, which is, how do you see politics impacting climate negotiations or business decisions around climate policies? And the person writes, because we can't ignore politics, both in business and in big picture policy discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. We all asked for that political will. It's very clear that without that, the policy decisions are not being taken. And of course, you're looking at the climate negotiations at the global level and the local politics, if I interpret the question correctly, or if I may interpret that question in such a way. But of course, there's politics at every level, right? The climate negotiations are full of politics at the global level as well, in terms of national interests, but of course, through the NDCs and other mechanisms, there are many different stakeholders involved, lobby groups, different interests. There's always that question between who is most affected by high petrol prices, who is losing jobs, and so on. So, of course, that cannot be ignored. But I think if the local discussions really start with an integrated approach to sustainability and look at the different dimensions at once, and rather than pitching climate change against development, then hopefully some of those politics can be overcome. Of course, in an increasingly polarized world, that's very difficult to achieve, but I think it's also the only way, and I think you can play that through in terms of your simulations. And but yeah, I think starting at the local level and feeding that into global goodwill certainly is the way forward.
Yeah. I think I would echo what Bernard said, and from our perspective, what we are trying to do is, as an industry, we are coming together like brands or the industry in a particular country, and we are trying to lobby with the government, all the policymakers, what are the benefits for them if we would be able to also work in that environment and achieve what we want to achieve. So this is the only way we can influence a little bit, but of course it is very important for any kind of industry or business to be supported at a higher level, global and then also local by the governments and policymakers. Otherwise it is very difficult to navigate.
Great. Thank you so much for answering these questions and for your very informative presentation. Let's use our reactions to say thank you or to silently clap. Thank you. The next two things, and I am sorry that we didn't get to all of the questions that you had. So the next thing that we're going to do is that Tina is going to help walk us through taking a group photo. Some of you sent me a note that you didn't want your photo, so this would be a time to turn your camera off, but we would ask that everybody who is willing turn your camera on. Tina, you'll let us know when you're done with each of the rooms, and then after this we're going to take a short break and then we'll come back.
At the University of Oregon, trained as an ecologist, she has taught biology courses and led science education professional development, for which she has received several teaching awards. With global partners, she develops and facilitates customized STEM education programs for faculty and student experiences and internships. She graduated from Earlham College and completed her graduate work at Oregon State University. And it is my pleasure to introduce the second speaker for Simulation 101, Dennis Galvan, who is Dean and Vice Provost for the Division of Global Engagement, Vice Provost for Strategic Initiatives, and Professor of Political Science and Global Studies at the University of Oregon. A political scientist by training, Dr. Galvan has conducted extensive fieldwork in rural Senegal and Indonesia. His research focuses on how ordinary people implement creative tactics to dismantle and reorganize institutions designed to promote development. He works with colleagues to carefully and creatively improve university structures to make higher education more resilient and able to respond with agility to changing circumstances. Oh my goodness, that was a job the past 2.5 years. He received his PhD from UC Berkeley and his AB from Stanford University. So thank you to both of you for walking us through how to do a simulation.
Thank you, Melissa. This presentation comes about because both Dennis and I have had the great privilege of teaching with simulations in our courses. I have used reacting to the past simulations in science courses, and Dennis has created this complex country, world, and political science and global science courses, global studies courses. So, what is a simulation, you might ask? You're signed up for this simulation. This is role-playing or role immersion. The outcome of this 3 days that we'll be together is guided, but it's not predetermined. So we would like to encourage you to really learn your roles well. You're each representing a country or a region, and we've given you materials to prepare. So you want to spend time really preparing and taking on the objectives for your particular country. With your co-students, you will determine the outcome, and there'll be room facilitators who are faculty from each of our universities that will help guide that process. So Dennis and I are going to ask each other some questions, and we have some answers for you. As we think about learning through play, just sometimes students say to us, really, we can learn this way?
So Thank you, Ellie, and thank you, Melissa, for that introduction. It's nice to be with you all. I'm so delighted that you're doing this simulation. And Ellie, will this version of a simulation with all this role play be academically challenging?
Absolutely. And while this simulation should be fun, it will also be challenging. You may find it academically rigorous. You might be learning new things about climate change or from a new perspective that you've never experienced before. You might find it stressful, and sometimes it can be morally or emotionally challenging, especially if you have been assigned to a delegation that holds different objectives than you might have as a person in your own everyday life. That's okay. Hang on to those emotions. You can find a way to work through them. So Dennis, can we learn about serious matters through play?
It's almost as if the question should be, is there any way to learn about serious matters without play? Which is a way of saying, yes, absolutely. And play here does not mean making light of a very serious, very grave topic like climate change. Play engages our brain in a different way. And here, think play as theater. Think play as the serious study that is required to step into a role and to perform that role. But by performing that role, learning another way of seeing and another way of doing. And we think that that's a skill that's absolutely essential if we as a species are going to address the climate challenge.
Right, because it really makes it real for us in a new way.
Absolutely.
Oh, let me go to the next question.
And will playing a simulation be stressful? Will playing a simulation on this heavy of a topic create stress, Ellie?
Well, we already know that there's stress around climate change. I saw this when I read your responses to why you're participating in this. We just saw this in the 2 talks that we just heard. These are big issues. And we know that avoiding stress actually leads to greater stress. So the pain that you might experience in this simulation is what we call constructed. It's not inflicted. So it's outside of you, even though you are experiencing it. We hope that this is a safe place for you. We hope that with your small groups, you'll be able to process some of the big emotions that you might be having or that might come up for you. And then we also encourage you to find ways to process the ideas, process the feelings. Part of the wonder of having a group of faculty and students from each of your universities is that you already have a built-in group of people who are having a similar experience. So we really encourage you to seek those people out if you have struggles and as you're processing this. Dennis, what should a student do if they don't agree with the goals of their delegation?
Wow, this is going to be inevitable, and it is okay. In fact, this is how I think you refine your own positions, by understanding and really experiencing and playing through a position that you may not agree with. This reflects how the world really is, that the countries and groups of countries that you represent naturally have internal disagreements. But playing through the objectionable role is a way of developing a skill that we all benefit from, empathy. It's also a way of developing incredibly useful argumentation skills, but it's a demanding thing to do. It requires you to operate at multiple levels in real time at the same moment, to operate at the level of your own values and your own positions, but with agility, recognize the other values and the other position of the character that you may be playing. I really, in my own experience of 20 plus years of teaching, I see this as an unbelievable and very rapid form of skill development for all of us. So I encourage you to embrace this tension. It's one of the most productive tensions you will find. And that's why this is such a great simulation.
And you just used those words again of playing a character. So this is a role, this is a character, and actors don't always agree with the roles that they're playing.
What if, heaven forbid, we might get the wrong answer?
it might happen, but good thing about a simulation is there's no right or wrong answer. What we are really hoping for is that you have really deep engagement. We hope that you have an experience of what it's like to really think about how are we going to change globally, change our climate? How are we going to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius change? And I think that you will find over the course of the 3 rounds of negotiation how difficult that is. So we encourage you to learn as much as you can. Read the materials that are on Canvas, watch the videos, ask questions of your faculty room facilitators during the next session in 2 weeks. In 4 weeks, you will have representatives who will speak on special topics such as clean technology or aforestation. Ask them questions, learn as much as you can. And that'll help you understand how, with such a wicked problem as this, there are no right or wrong answers. How should students prepare?
There's so much here to say, and as you just mentioned, Ellie, as any good actor taking on a new role, you want to really immerse yourself in that role. You've got an enormous wealth of background materials, of videos, and you've also got your team. Communicating with your delegation group members is in a really important way, whether that's on email, whether that's on WhatsApp, whether that's on other social media platforms. Really getting to know your team members is a way to warm yourself up. It's a little bit like a voice exercise before a major singing performance. So engaging with your group members is really important, and engaging with the other delegates from your home university gives you a little bit of an opportunity to sort of play act the beginning of negotiations, because of course you've got other folks from your own university who are not in the same group. Of course, attending all the sessions, as Ellie was just describing, is a great way to get ready, to make sure that you're taking in all the relevant information that can prepare you for the role. Knowing that this is that good improvisation, good jazz improvisation requires mastery of the score and the musical skills. So what you're looking at on the screen here is master the score, master your instrument, because you're going to make sounds with it that no one has ever made before. And interaction on Zoom. How do we do this on Zoom, Ellie?
Well, we have the Zoom chat, and I see that people are already taking advantage of that. There were lots of good questions. Keep doing that. Make a note to yourself. Have your phone nearby. Have a pen and paper nearby. Pretty soon we'll be putting you into breakout rooms so that you can have smaller group conversations. And then, as you're already doing, using your audio and video tools so that you are showing your face, you're showing your delegation background, and you're muting and unmuting at appropriate times. But related to this, since we're online and we're across many different time zones, how do we meet and talk to, gather with, secretly whisper to, or make deals with others?
Yeah, this is a fascinating challenge, and we've seen it work in other simulations and other experiences using Zoom. So here's a few thoughts. Think of the Zoom chat that you're all using right now a bit like shouting across the whole room, or imagine, if you will, the British Parliament meeting and all the yelling that happens. The Zoom chat is a big open space for you to express yourself, but not with much subtlety or discretion. And there's a time for subtlety and discretion, and there's a time for being loud and being heard. Speaking in the big Zoom, of course, is a form of actually shouting across the room. And it's important for you to feel okay doing that. That part of the simulation is designed to bring out those moments where we're talking to each other, even though there are 160 or 170 of us participating. Private Zoom chat is a little bit like a whisper, that we can be a lot of us in this room, but we can be walking up to each other and offering a few thoughts, or trying out the shape or the outline of a deal that might work its way further down into the negotiations. So whispering in private is good. A Canvas discussion board is a little bit like a caucus or a small meeting, maybe gathering outside the conference room, someplace for a group of you to quickly improvise together the beginning of a way of working together in Canvas discussion board. Email contact list, of course, is a great way to build your network and further those kinds of private conversations. And those will also take place in email to create subgroups of various kinds. Text, WhatsApp, WeChat, Snapchat, Instagram. These are ways for you to form unexpected new alliances and caucuses, which in any good negotiation should be expected to emerge organically out of the creativity and imagination that you're going to naturally bring to these roles. And this is what's going to make your simulation and your negotiated set of solutions for a path out of the climate crisis different than last year's and different than any other one. So have fun with it and use all these ways to connect with each other.
Absolutely. And this week, we got an email from students who participated just last year, and they were continuing to be in touch and wanted access to some of the resources because it's part of a project that they're doing across institutions, across economies, to further their own experience with being climate activists.
Life imitating art. What could be better than that? That's perfect. So to be successful in this, just to recap, understand your delegation's perspective, understand who you are, your character as best you can, and stay in that character as you interact and negotiate. And you're thinking and you're speaking and acting for your delegation's positions and interests, but don't think of this as a rigid script which provides you every answer to everything you might think or do. So you want to understand the background, you want to understand your delegation, but then you're going to have to respond in the moment, and you're going to have to do so with agility and with creativity and with flexibility. And that's what I think you'll find very exciting. You'll want to really appreciate the diversity and range of the many cultures both that we bring, that the 160, 70 of you bring to the interaction and that are represented in the simulation. And there is absolutely no need to engage in cultural appropriation. You're playing roles and you're not playing stereotypes. You're playing people who, whether they represent the United States or China or the European Union or developing countries or India, these are people in positions in government and in civil society, and that's who you're playing. And you don't need to worry about venturing into anything that looks like cultural appropriation. It doesn't serve you well and it doesn't help, but you want to riff off what your character as the Deputy Minister of Agriculture might think and do if they were such a person coming from a specific country.
Great. So a couple last notes about simulations. The first is that we will be conducting this simulation in English, much like the sessions today have happened. And there's two things to think about. One is that if English is your first language, make space and slow down for students in your group for whom English may not be their first language. And then secondly, if English is not your first language, ask for help, ask for support, ask for translation. Part of the value of being in a small group is that you can work together. You're not in competition with each other in your small group, you're working together. So make sure that everyone is able to fully participate. And just some final thoughts from us. The first one is to have fun. This is a form of play. Again, even though we're dealing with really serious issues here. Ask questions. I've been so grateful that many of you have asked questions on the Canvas discussion board, or you've emailed me, or you've put them in the chat. Please keep doing that. We're happy to answer any questions. Learn from each other, the other students, learn from the faculty experts, and use this as an opportunity to really grow your global network, because together this is how we will work towards solutions of combating climate change. Any last thoughts that I forgot, Dennis?
I think that sums it up incredibly well. I would just add that what you do in simulation, you'll be amazed how much it sticks with you years from now, and how applicable it will be. There's something about simulation as a mode of learning, which for many people really results in deeper engagement and deeper imprinting than reading, listening, and writing. So think you're embarking on a journey that has the potential for some significance for yourself as a person, but also for yourself as a global citizen concerned about this collective problem and what we can do about it.
Great. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you, Dennis.
Thanks, Melissa. I know there were some questions in the chat about what we were just talking about. I don't know if you have time to tackle those.
Maybe we can respond. Go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, I was going to say, I think Christy will get to those in the next talk.
Great. All right. Our Christy.
Good morning, good evening, everybody.
Hello. Well, great. So our last main room session speaker this evening is Dr. Christy Evi, who has been conducting research and practice on the health risks of climate variability and change for 25 years. She is the lead author of the Human Health Chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's the IPCC, 6th Assessment Report, and was a lead author on the IPCC Special Report on Warming of 1.5 degrees C and the 4th U.S. National Climate Assessment. She co-chairs the International Committee on New Integrated Climate Change Assessment Scenarios, ICONICS, facilitating development of climate change scenarios. Her scientific training includes an MS in toxicology and a PhD and a Master's of Public Health and Epidemiology, and 2 years of postgraduate research at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So please join me in welcoming her to talk with us about what you will be pledging to in this simulation.
Well, thank you very much. And I will add that we put this session in because there's some confusion in some of the participants last year, but boy, the questions everybody's been asking are really excellent. If we go to the next slide, please. And the speakers have covered a lot of material. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what it is you're going to do. As you've heard, there's going to be 3 rounds of pledges. The first round of pledges is going to happen before day 1. And this is the example for the green room. It's the same for all the color rooms. Colors are different, but the same process for each. And you can see that you're going to have to fill in these various cells. You've got 3 main tasks. So the first is you have to set your greenhouse gas emission targets. And you're going to do that by the first 3 columns after the region. The first is what is the year in which emissions peak. And this is when your country has the highest emissions. The way this simulation is set up, it has to be from 2021 or moving into the century. I'll give it away that at least for the US and for Europe, our emissions have been pretty stable for the last several years, that if we keep on this track, our emissions have already peaked. But you have to think about within your country, within your region, what the energy transition is going to look like. What needs to be done to reach that point where your emissions are the highest they're ever going to be? And think about what year that could be. And this is a task you're going to do together. And this is why you've got a group that's going to work together. You've got different areas of expertise. You've got access to lots of materials that can help you decide what year you think that's going to occur. As I mentioned, for the US and the EU, our emissions have probably peaked and they're pretty stable. They're not really reducing much. They're staying pretty level. So what you need to do next is, once you've selected the year in which your emissions are going to peak, you have to decide what's the year that your emissions are going to start to reduce. And this is a similar kind of process in thinking about the peak year for emissions, because you have to think about how much does your economy rely on fossil fuels? How well placed are you to start rapidly scaling up solar and other kinds of renewable energy? We heard an inspiring talk from somebody at Adidas of the kind of things that they're doing as a private company. And you have to think from the perspective of your country or your region, how fast can you make that energy transition? And so there's a difference between the year in which there's a peak, and then at some point after the peak is when the emissions start to reduce. And as I said, for the US and the EU, we've already hit the peak, we hope, but we don't really have when those emissions are going to start to be reduced. And that's one of the tasks you really have to work through. Once your emissions start coming down, what's your annual reduction rate? How much are you going to bring those greenhouse gases down by? And this is part of the nationally determined contributions of countries that have made pledges on this reduction rate. So that's the first set of targets that you have to set, that you're going to propose in the negotiations. The second set is on your energy, on your forestry policy decisions. And you can see that there's two issues on the, I didn't change those slides. Usually it's me. I touch something near my computer and the slides change, but it wasn't me that time. The first is on a scale from 0 to 100%. How much effort are you going to take to prevent deforestation? And so that's just a percentage. Are you going to reduce deforestation by 20%, 50%, whatever your number is? But you have to take a look at what the country or the region is doing in terms of deforestation and how quickly you can reduce that deforestation. The second half of this is how are you going to promote afforestation, which is, again, on a scale from 0 to 100%. And this is how much are you going to increase the forest cover? There's lots of efforts in high-income countries at the moment to start afforestation efforts. There's afforestation efforts in the Sahel, in sub-Saharan Africa. And think about, it's a lot of work to get more trees planted. Afforestation is not planting a few, it's planting a lot. So these are both percentages, and you have to enter what your commitments are as you go into the first round of negotiations. And the last task is to look at your climate finance needs. And again, there's two numbers you're going to have to put. And the first is, are you going to ask for money from the global funds, or are you going to contribute to money for the global funds? And how much in billions per year are you going to ask for, or are you going to give? And so you have to indicate whether you're going to be giving money. Obviously, the US is not going to be asking for money from the Global Fund. For the US, it's how much are you going to give? For developing countries, they're going to be asking for money for the Global Fund. And that includes both for adaptation and for mitigation. And so you have to think through, again, what that number could be. And then finally, which group member will give a position speech? And if we could go to the next slide, this is what you need to do for day one. The homework relates to what I just spoke about, and you can find all this homework on Canvas. There's going to be speeches, 2-minute delegation speeches, and then you're going to start working on the negotiation around your first round of pledges. Let's see if I could go into the chat. A couple of questions have come in. Do you need to cite sources as part of your discussions or arguments? Internationally in negotiations, no, that never happens. Occasionally a delegate will refer to the IPCC, the new Working Group 3 report, but it really doesn't happen. So you don't need to do that. It does help that you've done your homework and you know the basis for what you're proposing, but no citations. The deforestation is within your country or your region. So your pledges, if you're in a low income country, you're not making a pledge for Brazil. Brazil's going to make its own pledge. So this is only what you are going to do. As part of the negotiations, what happens when you're in real life negotiations is when there's discussions on deforestation, someone will turn to Brazil and say, and what are you going to do? But your role is to just think about your country or your region. I see there is a note in the chat about it would be helpful to know where your material comes from, but you don't have to cite it when you make your presentation. How do we decide the reduction? Should it be 10% or 20%? This is where you've got homework to do and to figure out where the country or the region stands right now. What is the rate, for example, of deforestation? What's the rate of the energy transition? And to think about, based on your understanding of the situation in the country or region, what could be possible. And you have to think about over what time frame that's going to occur. Did I miss anything in there that would be helpful?
Christy, there's a question about the speeches, and I just want to clarify that within each delegation, one student will be the person who your delegation decides will give that speech. So if there's 6 people in your group, it's not 6 speeches from the European Union, it's 1 speech. Christy, there's also a question for the climate finance needs. How do we make a difference between the request and contribution numbers?
You're either going to make a request or you're going to make a contribution. And then there is access in the materials to things like the nationally determined contributions, where countries have indicated their urgent and immediate needs for adaptation and mitigation. And you can see what countries have said about what they need. And you can use that as a guide. Remember that negotiators are negotiators, that they come in with positions knowing that they're going to have to negotiate, except in the US Congress, that they come in and they do have to, if you come forward and say, I want to take this amount of money out of, for example, the Green Climate Fund, somebody's going to push back on that of how come you need so much. And so you're going to have to come in with a position where there's flexibility. So typically countries ask for more than what they're going to absolutely need, knowing that they're going to have to give ground on some of these numbers. And so think about that from the perspective of negotiating. My advice on Ukraine and Russia is to not include those. The situation is far too fluid and far too complicated at the moment. I'm sure that the organizers will agree that just don't consider them at the moment. It's a couple of years from now, when we know what the outcome is, it's going to be better.
So everyone has every delegation has a debriefing sheet that will give you some of the information that you're asking about. So that gives you a little bit of background on your country or region.
Melissa, I'll just say that there's a student who asked if you can't find your name, email, you can direct message me and I will help find you. There's also a couple of Aforestation questions that have come in now.
The Aforestation is in your country or in your region. And yes, I know that there are trading schemes of Aforestation projects in other regions for which a country can get credit. The simulation's not going into that level of detail. So just think about within your own country or in your own region. And the briefing materials, as I looked at them, do have some information about Aforestation, as I recall. Yeah. Thank you for the confirmation on that, Melissa. I appreciate that. The Aforestation is a percentage. So you put in a percentage that you're going to try and reforest some percent. That this is a simulation numbers are going to be input into a program, and it doesn't really work on numbers of trees to be planted. So just make a guess on the percentage. You can think about it, planting 1 million trees in a small country is a huge addition. Planting 1 million trees in some other countries that are very large is not really that much of an impact. So think about it as a percent. These are great questions. Anybody else have other questions? This will become clear as you work on it, but we wanted to try and give you the chance to think about the numbers that you're going to be putting forward and put them into context.
Also, I'd just like to add that, again, after your first pledge in day 1, you will have an expert that will be in your room with you, just your own delegation, to help provide a little more context or help walk you through some of the decisions, and you could bounce off ideas. So, you know, don't worry, definitely try to represent your country's interests and positions. And this is more about learning. The first step is really learning about your country's background and considering all the decisions and what their agenda might be. But certainly the first pledge doesn't have to be the final result and won't be the final result.
The first pledge will not be the final result. It's guaranteed it will not be the final result.
Okay, no more questions. Fabulous. Thank you so much, Dr. Evi, for that. We really appreciate you taking the time to help provide some expertise knowledge about the topics on the worksheet and pledges, certainly from someone who's considered these questions for decades now. So thank you again for being here.
Well, thank you, and enjoy this very much. You will find it fascinating and fun.
Yes, absolutely.
And there's
Melissa,
a question, Melissa, about the endpoint.
Yeah.
Sorry, the last comment in the chat. Do you want to clarify that?
Sure. The endpoint is the simulation. So there is a worksheet on Canvas, and after each round, each team, each color room will be inputting pledges onto a shared worksheet on Canvas. And so part of your homework for day 1, to meet with your groups, decide on, I think we have slides for this, maybe, decide on your pledges, and those are on Canvas. So maybe we could put those in the chat. So that is, we're not going to make a document, we're just going to go through the simulation and the pledges together after each round. Okay, great. Those are the pledges. I believe we have some slides, a couple of slides still to go. So now we're going to give you some time to meet your groups. So for next time, so for day 1, you have been assigned either a blue room, a green room, or an orange room. Just so you know if you're in the right place, wanted to let you know for the blue room, you're going to have Ellie and Rebecca playing the roles of the UN Secretary General and the Executive Secretary of the UNCCC. And for green room, it's me and Zhengyu Zhang, who will be playing the role of Executive Secretary. And then orange room is Vivian Lee, who's here as UN Secretary General, and Shannon Gibson as Executive Secretary of the UNCCC. So we're going to give you, again, some time in a couple of moments to meet your group, to exchange info, to set up a WeChat or WhatsApp group. Please remember that not all students in all countries have access to WhatsApp. So please keep that in mind when considering things like Google or WhatsApp, that you need to include all of your team members in communications. And next slide. So we're going to give you, about 20-ish minutes to say hello. Are there any final, before we move into those rooms though, are there any final questions?
Melissa, I'd also share that we're really glad that some guests have joined us who were just here for this opening plenary session. So this next part with the breakout rooms is for students who have been signed up by their universities to participate in the simulation.
Oh, good. Yes, thank you. So you should already have a color and a delegation, all of that. So I would like to also remind you that next time for day 1, which is in 2 weeks, same place, same time, for the first hour, we will have 2 speakers, and then we will move into our individual rooms by color and delegation to start the simulation and negotiations, to hear your 2-ish minute pledges, that kind of thing. So remember that next time you join this same room again for the first hour, and then we'll let you leave when it's time to move into your blue, green, or orange room. The facilitators tonight don't have any other assignment or roles. Next time, then the expert facilitators will come in after the first hour of speeches. Okay, other questions? Yes, you all have been assigned to a room. If you're not sure what color room you are, please stay here and we can let you know what room, but everyone should have checked Canvas by now, and you should know, you could see a lot of students already have their backgrounds, should know what delegation you will be representing starting next time. And again, make some links right now, introduce yourselves, get to know your teammates or your delegation mates a little bit better today. Right. Well, then we are now going to move into our rooms. The room links again are in the chat. We'll just give you a couple of minutes to get situated, and we'll open up breakout rooms for you to meet your teammates. Any other questions? All right. Thank you once again so very much to all of our speakers, our facilitators, our guests who have joined for this kickoff event. It's really been a pleasure to see so much passion and interest and engagement by students. And we're looking forward to seeing what unfolds over the next 2 days of simulation. Thank you, everyone.